Wrapping up our MLB Draft week, we've got the National League. Who are the winners and losers from each division? Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On MLB Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, welcome on in to Locked On MLB Prospects, your home for all things minor league baseball. I'm your host, Lindsey Crosby, freelance baseball writer and podcaster. Thank you for making this your first listen. Every single day, we're probably part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and this is your show. If you have ideas for our upcoming episode, questions for our Monday mailbag, you can reach out to us. Tons of ways to do that, whether it's Twitter, email, things like that. Best way is probably our subtext. Links in the episode description, links in the show notes. All right, so look at the National League winners and losers. Starting in the National League East, because as we've talked about, the everydayers know this. I'm a Braves fan. That's where I'm going to start. The winner to me was actually the Miami Marlins. We mentioned this on Wednesday's show when I kind of gave some of the rapid-fire quick reactions after day 3 of the draft. But the Marlins zigged where everybody else zagged. They looked at the strengths of this MLB draft and how there was so much college hitting, and they said, well, we're really good at developing pitching, so we're going to go out while everybody's focused on taking these college bats. We're going to go get the best 2 prep pitchers on the board. So first round, right-hand pitcher Noble Meyer. Second round, left-hand pitcher Thomas White. And both of these look really good. So Noble Meyer has touched 101 as a high schooler. It's ridiculous. He sits 96, 98 on the fastball normally. Has a slider and a curveball. Both of them, tons of spin, right? So it fits the metrics, it fits the data, it fits the models that you're looking for. And it's something where, like, a couple people have issues with the delivery, the shape of the fastball, but it's a pretty impressive set of raw tools. It makes sense he was the first prep pitcher off the board. But then to follow that up with Thomas White, the left-hander. So they broke the seal on both righty and lefty pitching. And this is something, he's already 6'7". It's listed at 210. He's not 210. He's at least 220 pounds. 6'7", 220 out of high school. Sits 95 miles an hour with the fastball. Has a curve and a changeup. The changeup's plus. The curve's probably pretty close. I didn't get a great look at it. But it's something where, not an amazing athlete, but like, again, it's a lefty that throws 95. You don't find those everywhere. So they kind of nailed those first 2 picks, right? And then after that, they immediately go into super powerful college bats, right? They take Kemp Alderman, the outfielder, in the second round. Something where listed at 250, probably bigger than that, confined to a corner or possibly DH if everything doesn't go right. But again, power is absolutely massive, has some swing and miss, but fits the prototypical picture of those big sluggers, right? Right after him, Brock Vandenberg, another big slugger. Now, he is probably limited to first base, but again, they go for huge power ceilings with those next 2 position player picks. So that's your first rounder, your second, your third, and then they go back to the well of pitching in the 4th and a couple times after that, and really kind of focus on, again, this is what we do well. They take Nebraska lefty Emmett Olson in the 4th round. Big fan there. Fastball sits 93, 94. Not the greatest fastball, but the slider's good. The curveball gets a lot of chase on it. You've got a lot of tools. It feels like the shape of a fastball is probably the easiest thing to fix. So something where, again, we trust we trust the pitching development of the Miami Marlins to build a pitcher, especially a guy like him who already has 4 pitches and doesn't really struggle with handedness issues. There's no lefty-righty significant splits or anything like that. Follow that up, couple more pitchers, Andrew Lindsay, Justin Storm, the righties. Both these guys, again, kind of fit the model, right? Really good stuff as far as fastball, breaking pitches. You've got to work out. Storm may end up being a reliever. He worked in relief at Southern Miss. But still, just going with pitchers that they can make better because they leaned into their strengths despite what the class had. The features of the class were very much college hitting. They said, we're gonna take our super high ceiling guys. They're probably the only team in the draft that got 2 pitchers that if everything broke right, they can probably be top of the rotation options, right? Like they're starting your first playoff game. They're opening day starters. And no other organization is able to come out of this draft and say, we got 2 guys that could be those guys for us. So I like what the Marlins did a lot in this draft as far as getting value with where they picked and balancing the need for living off the board versus what we do well and kind of maximizing value there. The draft I didn't love in the National League East was actually the Philadelphia Phillies. Now, part of this was quantity. They didn't have a second rounder or a fifth rounder because of different free agents they signed. So some of it's just the volume. And honestly, there's a couple of these picks I did like. Aiden Miller in the first round, probably going to kick out to third base. Shortstop in high school, so many of the good ones are. But I think it was really good value to get him at 27. He was probably a top 15 pick before he had that hamate bone that was broken in the middle of his season. So good value to get him at 27. In the 10th round, right-hand pitcher Cam Brown out of TCU. I know I jumped all the way to the 10th round, but I really like fastball, slider, looked good at TCU. Struggled a little bit this last year as far as the control and things like that, but still, I think this is good value. And I think that if you look into some of the previous years, he looked better than what he did in his platform year. So there's obviously a little bit of what changed in that year. Was it usage? Was it coaching? Was it mechanics? Was he playing through something? There's a little bit of easily, like you can fix him there. And if you get him back to the 2022 form, where he was talked about maybe being a third or fourth round pick this year versus the 23 form, I mean, you took him in the 10th. Fantastic value. Now, the reason they're in here is a lot of the guys between the first round and the 10th round just didn't necessarily love. Their third rounder, Devin Saltabon out of Hilo, Hawaii, might stick in center field. I'm not 100% sure. They listed him as a shortstop. I don't think he's like the defensive actions are not good enough for short. I mean, we've seen it, and it's something where you're probably, because of the speed, you're probably going to move him to the outfield versus the infield. And so, yes, he could stick in center field, but it still lowers the defensive ceiling for you and lowers the value there. And to take that guy in the third is a little bit tough. Again, you didn't have a second round pick. In the fourth round, outfielder Tayshaun Watson, a guy that corner outfielder profile in high school, which has to worry a little bit about what the physical development's going to do going forward, but he didn't really hit for a lot of power. And so you have all of the negatives that come with the corner outside profile, the limited defensive versatility, things like that, but you don't have the power that typically comes with the defensive, with the corner outfield profile. It's like you're taking the worst stuff of Kyle Schwarber and not the 40 home runs a year. And so it just felt like it wasn't a great job of maximizing the value on the choices. The 2 righties that they took back-to-back in the 6th and 7th, George Klassen and Jake Eddington. The stuff is really, really good. There's no command there. Both of them walked like 40-something guys and 50-something innings this year. And so, yeah, you can hit 100, but if you can't throw it for a strike, it doesn't matter. Now, this is obviously a bet on the Phillies' pitching development. We've seen them do some work with Mick Abel. Obviously, Andrew Painter, I think, was just drafted amazing, so it's kind of ignored that. But Mick Abel, Griff McGarry, they've done some magic with some guys who had good stuff, but if in command. But this is really a bet that those guys can do that, and it just felt like to have so few picks, because again, you lost the second and you lost the fifth, to take these guys who were significantly flawed where you did, just didn't feel like great value on the board. In just a minute, we're going to get to the National League Central where, spoiler alert, I don't actually have a loser here. I just have 2 winners because I kind of liked all of the drafts in the Central. And we'll get to that next right here on Locked On MLB Prospects. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. And it's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay's guaranteed fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check mark to know your part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. With over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. So get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Okay, so looking at the National League Central, couple teams here, again, like I said, I didn't hate any of these drafts. You have to love that the Pirates actually didn't didn't take the money-saving prep guy or whatever at 1, and they took Paul Skeens. We've beat this horse to death now, but I've talked about how they needed to go and get Paul Skeens versus trying to lowball somebody at 1-1. Because theoretically, you don't want to be picking at 1-1 ever again. You want to improve the franchise. And if you were of the mindset you were going to cheap out and save money at 1-1, that's a sign you probably were never going to get out of the basement in the Central. But for the first winner, I'm actually going to give it to the Chicago Cubs. And I'm going to be honest, I didn't necessarily expect to be giving it to the Cubs when I sat down to write the show. But you look at what they did. So taking Matt Shaw out of Maryland, the shortstop, at number 13, he was a guy that if you get past that first tier of guys, the Dylan Cruz, the Wyatt Langford, he was seen as having probably being the best college hitter in the draft. And they got him at 13. A lot of people had him as a top 7 talent, like the best of the rest once you got past that tier 1 of guys. Something where he can hit off speed, he can hit velocity, he can hit breaking stuff. The barrel rates are good, the hard hit rates are good, the chase rates are good. He's an advanced hitter. Probably not going to stick it short. The arm isn't great, but even if you move him to second base, it's a premium bat. And again, one of the best arms in the draft. If we're talking about position player picks, I did like Michael Carrico, the catcher out of Davidson, at 5. Missed some time because of a broken hand, but when he was in later in the season, showed plenty of power, didn't have a lot of swing and miss, and it really felt like something where if he had been healthy the whole year, he was going to come up from the 5th round to something closer to the top, especially in a draft that was really weak in catching, right? We talked about you had those 2 first-round guys, Blake Mitchell and Kyle Teal, the Prepster and the Virginia product, and after that, you didn't have anything for a while. And part of it was because guys like Michael Carrico broke their hand, things like that. So I think he would have been better than a 5th-round pick had he been healthy. Some of the arms that they took guys that slipped down the board due to either injury or poor performance in their platform year, right? So Jackson Wiggins out of Arkansas, out for the whole year with Tommy John, fell to the 2nd round. Had been a guy was throwing 100, slider looked really good, changeup was there, had some walk issues as a sophomore, but still has a ton of natural arm talent, fell to the 2nd because of the injury. As they're building him back from Tommy John, it's a chance to iron out the mechanics and figure out what was causing that walk rate to hit 14, 15% at Arkansas in that 2nd year. And if you can fix that, bring that down to a 10% or so, you got a guy. And you got him at a great value because you got him in the 2nd round. Continuing like that same trend, you go through, you look at some of these guys. Will Sanders out of South Carolina looked really good his sophomore year, struggled in this draft year. The velocity was really good, the slider broke really well, but something was wrong with the mechanics and he wasn't sequencing well. He wasn't using the changeup enough, and he was telegraphing the fastball in fastball counts. And so another guy, you can tweak a little bit, you can work, and he's there. And so I really like what they did. And even in like a poor group of prospects from Puerto Rico, they still went out and got one of the better ones in Yehiel Melendez in the 7th round. And so somebody where should be able to stay at shortstop. If he has to move, it's going to be the 3rd because the arm is plus. Like, has good bat speed, good hands, good wrist, should be able to hit as he continues to mature. Now, hasn't faced a ton of great pitching, but when you saw him against good fastballs, he was able to hit them. So a lot of promise. I like what the Cubs did as far as maximizing value where they drafted. And again, like we talked about, you can't properly grade a draft this soon after, right? Because we don't know how good these guys actually are. All we have is where did we think they should be on the board versus where did you take them? And so from that context, it looks like the Cubs did a good job of maximizing value, and so that's why I have them as a winner for the National League Central. The other team that is a winner, because again, I don't hate any of these drafts, which is surprising, because usually there's a team in every division. I'm like, what are you doing with this? But the Cincinnati Reds, and honestly, we usually love the Cincinnati Reds drafts because they draft a lot of guys that just look really good. But I love how they doubled up on high floor, pretty polished pitchers in Rhett Lauder from Wake Forest and then Ty Floyd from LSU. Both guys we saw look really good at the College World Series. Well, again, Lauder had probably the best changeup in the entire draft, but fastball, changeup, slider, really good guy, had some deception. And so, again, the Wake Forest guys that come out are pretty much finished products, and he's the best one we've seen in quite a while. So I like that. And then Ty Floyd got to the College World Series and absolutely exploded. We talked about that 17 strikeout game he had against Florida, and in case you didn't realize, a lot of these Florida guys got drafted pretty high this year. They were in the College World Series final. That was a good lineup, and he just tore through them. Again, it's the fastball. It's so incredibly good. He's been throwing a slider as a second pitch, doesn't really have a third, but we've seen what Cincinnati can do when they get that guy that has a really good fastball. One, they can improve it, look at Hunter Green, and then guys like Andrew Abbott, Brandon Williamson, they can make them better. So I like starting the draft off with those. If you want to keep going on pitching, Hunter Holland in the third, really good guy. The velocity dropped a little bit this year. He also had a knee injury. Ended up getting some surgery to fix it. And so a guy that would have been higher in the draft had he been healthy, going and kind of maximizing the value of where you take him. Probably would have been, especially in a draft that was weak on college lefties, probably could have gotten into the first round had he been healthy the whole time. So getting that in the third round is a really good value. He was sitting mid-90s before the injury. Obviously, he's got to work back on that, but a guy you could like. Cole Schoenwetter, and I double-checked that name before I said it because when you just see Wetter in a name, it kind of throws you off real quick. Cole Schoenwetter, prep player, committed to UC Santa Barbara, but fastball, curveball, both of them look to be really good pitches, right? And so something where he's working really hard to get these throws out, but for the most part, a prep pitcher with a high ceiling. They did take position players as well. You kind of look at some of the guys. Catcher Burns, out of college in the 5th round, hit 14 home runs. He also plays on the West Coast in a pitcher's park, and so that's probably, it's like how the Wake Forest guys get downgraded on how many home runs they hit. He should probably get upgraded because he hit 14 for Long Beach State, and the Dirtbags play in a ballpark that is really pitcher friendly. So give him a little credit for that. Again, also, the offensive ceiling's lower for a catcher, right? If you're a backup catcher, you don't have to hit as well. And so I feel like the combination of he's a good hitter for a catcher, has better power than I think we expected because of where he plays. You got him in the 5th round. Should be able to stick a catcher, shouldn't be an issue. He's looked pretty good for the limited bit I saw of the Dirtbags this year. And so I like the value of that in the 5th. Again, a guy who plays up from his conventional statistics because of where he played. A couple of guys, Ethan O'Donnell in the 6th round out of Virginia, should stick in center field. I don't know if the bat's going to be enough to be outside of a 4th outfielder, but still like that. Carter Graham in the 8th, the first baseman out of Stanford. I got no issue if you take a big power swing and miss guy in the 8th round. If he works out, then great. You've got a great first baseman. This system has enough power hitters where it's not urgent, but I feel like it's good value there because, again, if you can develop that guy into a reliable MLB piece out of the 8th round as a power hitting first baseman, you're happy. A lot of those guys, I think Goldschmidt was a later round pick. It wouldn't be the first time that happened, right? So love both the Cubs and the Reds picks this year. In just a minute, we're going to get to the National League West because we do have a team we love and a team that we didn't. They're in the same state. We'll get to that next right here on Locked On MLB Prospects. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Bird Dogs. Listen, okay, I told you I was going to do this. We have been at Disney World all day. This show is coming to you from the outskirts of Disney World, okay? I walked almost 7 miles today, pushing a stroller with a combined 12 years of children in it. It was incredibly hot, 95, 96 degrees, whatever. And we got done, and you know what? We were hot, we were sweaty, we were tired, but I felt great because of the Bird Dogs. Listen, okay, they have this anti-stink, sweat-wicking fabric. We did rides that you got wet on, like the aerial ride, stuff like that, and they dried super quickly. They didn't show any sweat all day. Everything else did. Obviously, the shirts, everything else did. Shorts did not show any sweat all day. They were comfortable. They were loose. They were airy. I cannot endorse Bird Dogs shorts enough. What I love, go to birddogs.com/LockedOnMLB or enter promo code LockedOnMLB for a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. Bird Dogs, the shorts will take care of you, and the company will take care of your beverage by getting you a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. birddogs.com/LockedOnMLB or promo code LockedOnMLB for a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. Listen, I cannot give Bird Dogs any higher endorsement than this is the most legitimate and sincere endorsement I have ever given on this podcast. Okay, so looking at the National League West, we mentioned this the other day, but the San Francisco Giants, I really like what they did. Also, again, we mentioned this is the second year in a row they've taken a two-way player, but just looking at some of what they did, so Bryce Eldridge was that two-way player, got him in the first round, is very much a hitter over a pitcher. I like him better as a hitter, but either way, it just feels like there's a lot of stuff here that you have to like the traits that he has, which is not something that I necessarily thought when I first went into this. The potential on that, and again, they're a team that lets these guys naturally work out whether or not they're going to stick as two-way players, and they learn a lot about the thing they end up sticking with. They learned a lot by doing the other thing. If they stick as pitchers, they learn a lot about how to get hitters out by being hitters in the minors. So, like Bryce Eldridge, I like the power potential there. If he ends up being a pitcher, I do like the fastball, although I think he's going to work out better as a hitter. Walker Martin, the prep shortstop, worst kept secret in the draft. Everybody knew they wanted Walker Martin. They took him in the second. We all expected it. I'm pretty sure I wrote that one on my board in pen the night of the draft, was not worried about it at all. So good choice there. The fact they were able to get him in the second instead of having to take him in the first, also a good thing. And then they go back to back to back with middle infielders out of college. Cole Foster from Auburn, Malby Ahuna from Tennessee, Quinn McDaniel out of Maine, third, fourth, and fifth. Now, I think McDaniel is probably a second baseman over a shortstop. I think Foster's the kind of guy, just having watched him all year in person, he can start at short, and a better defender will eventually kick him inside to second base. I think Ahuna is probably the guy who can legitimately stay at shortstop defensively. Now, offensively, there's some question. Ahuna has the highest potential. He also has the most to fix. Foster has decent power, but some swing and miss in there. Some of that's approach. He got a lot better in this junior year as far as his hitting approach and not trying to do too much. So I do think he's probably why he was drafted third round instead of fourth for Ahuna or fifth for McDaniel. McDaniel doesn't have a ton of pop that come out of Maine, but stole 32 bags in 38 attempts. Good on base of .513, is a guy that kind of that lighter hitting, prototypical leadoff guy can play second base for you. So I like those choices there. Between all of this, they took a pitcher in the second, Joe Whitman, out of Kent State, the 2A round. Fastball slider change, did really well against lefties. And it's funny, if you combine him with the 8-rounder John Bostic out of Grayson College, you've got like the perfect pitcher, right? Because Whitman, the lefty, really good against lefties. Fastball slider change. Bostic in the 8th, fastball slider, doesn't have that third pitch and really struggled against lefties. You combine their arsenals, you've got a perfect pitcher, but something where Whitman didn't have the platoon split, so he went high. Bostic did have the platoon splits, but also has room to add that third pitch, something that breaks the other direction, back to the arm side, to help with lefties. Like that choice there for the Giants. And then a couple guys, you took a Louisville catcher. I feel like you can't ever really lose with a Louisville catcher. Took him in the 11th, and Jack Payton. It's a guy, if you remember, Louisville had a run of college catchers, right? They had Will Smith, then they had Henry Davis, then they had Dalton Rushing, like really good catchers. So I think power-wise, he's not as good as the rest of those guys, but it's kind of hard to be like, yeah, if you can start at Louisville as a catcher, you're probably a pretty good player. So getting him in the 11th, it feels like is a good value. The team who I didn't love the draft in the West, and I'm not the only one, and it's because they're smarter than us, and we all kind of know it, is the Los Angeles Dodgers, right? I love the position players they took, right? Jake Gelliff in the second round. He's going to be a third baseman, but 70 power, right? Now, a little bit flawed, struggles with fastballs up in the zone. As you obviously know, that is one of the most popular fastballs to throw right now is that elevated fastball. So, got to fix that. And then defensively, I don't know if he's going to be able to stick on the dirt. Just hasn't been incredibly impressive, was probably an average defender in college. So doesn't bode well for his ability to stick there as he moves up in the system. Now, defense does get better as a guy moves up, but if he's not struggling in college at third, it feels like in the pros, you're going to end up kicking him out to an outfield corner. He'll be a left fielder or a right fielder, but either way, I do like the pick, though. Before that, Kendall George out of high school. Doesn't have a ton of power. Probably not going to stick in the dirt. Probably going to end up being like a center fielder or something. So don't necessarily love getting him in the 30s where you made your first pick. Making him your first pick is a little bit off. First baseman Joe Vitrano out of Boston College in the 5th round. Another case of you take that big power swing and miss first baseman in the middle rounds like that. Not a big deal. If it works out, great. The power's real. Again, good value to get that in the 5th round. The real issue I kind of had with this draft, with the acknowledgement up front, is the Dodgers, especially when it comes to pitching development, they know more than I do. So up front with that was the 3 arms I'm looking at, the fourth round, the 7th round, the 9th round. So Wyatt Crowell out of Florida State was a reliever that they just threw into the rotation mid-season, blew his elbow out, Tommy John. So he's trying to come back. Slider's really good. Fastball struggles to get into the low 90s. It's a really funky slot. A lot of guys that have that lower slot really aren't able to be starters at the major league level. So many guys that are almost sidearm aren't necessarily able to be starters. He's not all the way down there yet. It's still a low 3/4 slot versus a sidearm slot, but it's a lot closer. So as he's coming back from Tommy John, you have to kind of work on building that velocity in there, finding the third pitch, because you got the slider, but part of the reason the slider's so good is because he's dropped that slot down. And again, you don't typically see starters that are low like that. Well, the 7th round, Patrick Copen out of Marshall, the righty. He can't throw his fastball for strikes, which kind of feels like it's a problem. Like if you're in a mid-tier conference, you're a righty, throw it in the low 90s. You walked 50-something guys in 70 innings because you're not throwing the fastball for strikes. It feels like that's a low ceiling profile, right? The velocity's not there, the control's not there, and he's fastball heavy, and it's not even that great of a fastball. As far as like the ability to land it for a strike, it can get swing and miss, especially up in the zone. Again, they love throwing the fastballs up in the zone, but just wasn't necessarily a great pitch. And then Ryan Brown out of Ball State. Changeup's really good. I mean, one of the better changeup behind Rhett Lauder in the draft, but 60 walks in 74 innings in college. Another guy that just can't necessarily throw fastballs, or can't throw stuff for strikes. And so it's hard to not give the Dodgers the benefit of the doubt, right? We talked about how the AA Tulsa rotation was better than the Oakland A's rotation. So it's hard to not give them the benefit of the doubt, but it feels like you're almost drafting incredibly flawed pitchers, just assuming it's going to work out because the pitching development's so good. At some point in time, it's not going to work, right? They've taken these guys. Nick Nastrini is an example of a guy that they made really good. Nick Frost was a guy that they've made where a lot of folks think he's a starter. I think he's a reliever, but a lot of folks think he's a starter. So it's going to work out eventually. It just doesn't feel like this is the right one. So, fantastic week this week. Thank you all for working with the audio issues while we've been down here at Disney. Back in the studio next week. Remember, mailbags on Monday. You have questions for us. Tons of ways to get in touch with us. Best way is the subtext. Until Monday, enjoy the games this weekend, and remember, it's always a good time to pay a minor leaguer.